coughing and burping this whole stinking program. Oh, goodness gracious. We went to El Chico and I tried something new.
You had
And
to,
it,
you bold.
oh, I know. Well, honestly, I didn't realize what time it was. And she looked up, when we were almost done, she said, Don, it's almost 5 o'clock. It's like, oh, no. All right, come on, YouTube. You can do it. Man, there we are. There we are. And now we're going to hit record over here. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And over here in Memphis, just to the east of me, well, a good little ways, is my great friend William Bell of allthingsfulfilled.com. William, great to see you again.
Thank you, Don. It's good to be here as well, and glad to see you back. Hope everything went well with the family, and I know it wasn't the most favorable of circumstances, but that's the way of life. We all have to go that way one day, and to be there with family is a great thing for the support as well as everybody showing their love. So
it's it is, as you say, it's a bad thing. It's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
What made that particularly distressing, I suppose you say, is that he had gone into the hospital and they thought they had gotten that straightened out, but they felt like they needed to take a heart test. But my wife talked to him that morning before he went down to take one of those, dye tests, the injections of dye. And he told her, he said, I am feeling absolutely fantastic. He said, they've got me straightened out. He had some fluid on his heart, and they gave him Lasix, and that took care of it, seemingly. And he said, they're going to take me down and run another little test here in a bit. And he said, I'll be ready to go. And they called her 2 hours later, and he was gone.
Wow.
And, the wonderful thing about it was the very last thing they ever said to each other was, I love you. And so you can't ask for much more than
absolutely.
that, they've always had a good relationship, but, not what you would call a super, super close relationship, but plenty fine for a family relationship.
Yes.
And so that was really, really a shock. And, I was blown away at the number of people at his funeral. He was very well known guy, very well known.
Good.
So we got to visit with her family. She did, and like you said, there's always a positive side. You get together, family, you reconnect, and things like that. But it's really sad that it has to happen on occasions like that. So, as always, I really appreciate you filling in on such short notice. We didn't have much time. I mean, it was like,
no, we
bang,
didn't.
bang, here we go.
I put you in one of those situations where you have to say, now, what am I going to talk about?
Yeah, I know. So I saw that you discussed Hebrews chapter 8:13 to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Why don't you refresh our memory a little bit on what you covered last week? I got to watch a few minutes of it, not many, but I got to watch a few minutes. Of course, you and I have discussed that passage extensively down through the years. So, but anyway, for those of you who may not, of our viewers who may not have been able to join us or join you last week, why don't you refresh the memory and then we'll launch on out.
All right. Well, I'll go to as much as possible. That's been a week ago. A lot of things have happened since then, and then I had to do it on the spur of the moment, so to speak. So it doesn't lodge into the brain.
You got plenty of reserve there, brother. You got plenty of reserve.
At any rate, we talked about I talked about Hebrews 8, verse 13, particularly in the fact that it spoke of the new covenant coming in. Don and I had, talked a little bit about, and I mentioned that in the previous lesson, that we had talked about, the reasons for the coming of the new covenant, that, God found fault with the people, but also there was points related to the law for which it was insufficient in order to accomplish the perfection that was required, and that's expressed in Hebrews 7, 11, and 12 as well. But the idea of the new covenant, and some who believe that the old covenant ended at the time of the cross, which of course is not accurate, but also that he says, that it was becoming obsolete. And in becoming obsolete, it was ready or at hand to vanish away, and not having actually vanished away. So that many of the texts that are used, particularly from the background that we have come from, the Church of Christ, and that amillennial background that is focused on the cross as the time of the end of the law, rather than being the basis and the foundation through which the law would come to pass, meaning through the death of Christ, which was, absolutely essential in order for that to happen. But the future aspects of that fulfillment and consummation of the law happened, at 70 AD, or, in that time frame. And there are all kinds of passages within the New Testament that indicate that, many of which we have gone over, like 2 Corinthians 3, that deals with that transformation from glory to glory. Again, the text in Hebrews 7, 11, and 12, we've talked about several here in the book of Hebrews that indicate that. And even, I know we, maybe slightly touched on passages like Colossians 2:14, John 19:30, all of which are these proof texts that are used. But when you examine the context a little bit further, you find that, it just doesn't teach that. And so this idea that the old covenant was ready to vanish away, it was at hand to vanish, and thus the consummation of the new covenant that would replace it. And within that, was the language that he speaks about in terms of the covenant moving on into, and the tabernacle practices through those compartments of the high priest and the priest who would enter into those, that forms a part of what was the type and shadow of the old, moving into the very image, which is what is expressed in the upcoming verses. So I hope that's enough of an overview.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. Everything you said, obviously, I agree with, but help us out here, William. And like I said, I'm going to play the devil's advocate. Mr. Bell, you're telling us that the writer of Hebrews was saying the law was growing old and it was ready to vanish away. But in the very first two verses of chapter 9, it says, now that first covenant had, past tense, Mr. Bell, ordinances. So you're telling us that it's a present active passing, but the writer is actually saying that the old covenant had, past tense, aorist tense, ordinances. So that seems to be a past reality of the law. Pardon me, but you're talking about a present passing. So you got to explain this, Mr. Bell.
Well, first of all, I haven't looked at the language, and usually when I go into a text, I'm going to look at the language to see precisely what that says. But let's just say that it is talking about had. I would initially maybe respond in a couple of ways. One, if we're talking about ordinances, you have the text that speaks about in Colossians, for example, that says blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, and taking it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. And so from that perspective, he's dealing with those who are in the faith, and saying that this occurs for those who have entered into Christ. The other part of that would be just looking at the language. If it's an aorist, it could be what we would consider as the linear aorist that indicates, it will speak of it as in the past, but as you know, and as I've said, many times, that it reaches into the future. So even though it uses the aorist, it doesn't mean that it's actually consummated like that. And there's a lot of verbs in the New Covenant that speaks that way. So that's just off the top of my head without having done any detailed study in it. So I'll hand it back to you on that.
Well, I think that's a very good answer. Now, it's been a while since I looked at the linguistics, but if I'm not mistaken, and somebody may have to correct me on this, if our
And I was going to say one other thing.
okay,
Um, Now we've got the word covenant in there, but I don't know that would make. Um, well, actually, I'll just let it pass. Let's hear what you got to say.
I think you were going to comment on diatheke, if I'm not mistaken. But if our good friend Gerald Davis is watching, and see, I don't have any comments up here. I don't have a way of looking at comments. I don't guess, but he
Do
could
you want a
send.
scripture on? You want a scripture on the board or screen or anything?
No, I was. I was just saying that if Gerald was watching, Gerald's extremely good with the Greek. He can let me know tomorrow or let me know even later tonight. Uh, but if I'm not mistaken, probably am, but if I'm not mistaken, this is second aorist active or second aorist. And that would confirm what you are saying, that there is both a past and a linear perspective to it. But again, it's been a really long while since I looked at the Greek on that, so I may be wrong. I will look that up. And you know what, William? I'm going to uh, I'm going to do something about this time, uh, and see if I can do this. Okay, I'm going to Hebrews. Oh, come on now. You know, when you're trying to do something in a hurry, you can never do it.
Oh yeah.
Never can do it. Hebrews. Okay, give me the interlinear. Uh, had indeed. Uh, it is. Well, what happened there? I don't know what that is. Um, okay. Oh, it's interesting. It's an imperfect indicative active.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, that makes all the sense in the world.
It does, doesn't it? It does make lots of sense. So yeah, but I just looked up on Bible Hub, and there are the comments on the right hand side. And did you do that or did I do that?
What's that?
Showing up the comments on the right hand side of the screen.
Oh, I pulled it up. I didn't know that it was showing on your screen. Is it?
Yeah, it is now.
Wow.
Yeah.
I just looked at it. I thought I was looking at it in the background, just trying to
Yeah.
follow it.
No, it's showing up on the right hand side of my screen.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll close it out. I
No,
wasn't trying.
that's perfectly fine. I mean, if people want to make comments, and I can already see that we've got one fellow that's nothing but a, well, I won't make any comment on that. So anyway, so I think what we have to understand, and this is brought out by that imperfect active there, uh, is something that you and I have discussed on, many, many, many occasions, and that is this already, but the not yet of the entire first century process of bringing in salvation. And this is something that it seems to me people have a lot of problems wrapping their heads around. And they run over. I well remember in my formal written debate with Kurt Simmons some years ago on the passing of the law. And what Kurt Simmons did, he goes to all of these passages in the New Testament that says they had been saved already. Okay. They had been sanctified. They had been redeemed. That indicated that the law had passed. And he said, I don't need any other text. This is all that I need because all of these passages are in the aorist tense. It's a done deal. It's over and done. Preston is perverting the scripture. Well, when I would produce all of these scriptures that would talk about the same thing, okay, Ephesians chapter 2, 8, 9, for by grace have you been saved. Okay, right. Looking for the parousia and looking for the second coming of Christ who would bring salvation. And the same thing with grace. They had already received grace. Again, Ephesians 2, 8, 9. but they were looking for the grace that was to be brought to them at the parousia. And for every single constituent element that Kurt Simmons said, look at here, see, past tense, or present reality, you can produce a future reality. Mm-hmm. And he called me a false teacher for doing that. Well, interestingly enough, scholars throughout Christianity virtually have recognized this concept of the already, but the not yet. And William, you brought up a few moments ago, and I just figured out why the screen was on the right-hand side. I had accidentally flipped over to YouTube, and that's where all the comments are.
Okay.
I'm just on the Zoom screen right now.
Okay.
But anyway, you brought up 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Is this not a classic example of the already, but the not yet of the passing of the law?
Just perfect example, and a beautiful one at that. When you look at the context, it's just awesome. You cannot miss the conversation and comments on the ministry of the Spirit or the ministration of death versus the ministry of the Spirit. And as he carries that through, he talks about the one having glory, and then you have to look at the tenses that are mentioned there. They're in the present tense. And then he sums that up in talking about this transformation, this metamorphosis, if you please, from that old covenant body to the new, and from the glory to the more glory, or the more glorious. And that is I think it's a present passive indicative verb in that context.
We are being transformed.
Yeah. Yes, we are being transformed. And, to overlook that, it just is really just for people to just say that it doesn't mean that, and that's exactly what it's saying in that particular text. But showing you that that's what's happening. They were going through that transformation in the text.
And that's what makes it wrong, folks, to run over to passages like Hebrews chapter 9 and says, oh, well, look, it says that covenant had ordinances. Mm-hmm. Oh, had means past tense. Well, then you've got to ignore all of the present indicatives and present passives in 2 Corinthians 3, not to mention other passages, for instance, and you mentioned the fact that people have to ignore the Greek tenses. And I made mention of this several different times, actually, I think, on this program. Scott McKnight, a scholar for whom I have the tremendous respect, very nice guy, very likable. I had the opportunity to visit with him in Oklahoma City a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to give him a couple of my books. He promised to read them, but I've never heard from him. So, I don't, makes you wonder about it. But anyway, Scott McKnight, in his commentary on Colossians, which in a lot of ways is excellent, he comes to Colossians chapter 2, and Paul says, let no man judge you in respect of new moon, feast days, and Sabbaths, which are, present active, a shadow of the good things about to come, as you know. And Scott McKnight says, these Greek tenses have perplexed the scholars. They don't know how to deal with the present actives and the future of Melontes. So what they do is, this is his words, they reimagine the Greek tenses.
How is that possible?
Yeah. What he means by that is they ignore the Greek tenses and say they don't mean what they mean.
Right. They impose something else on the text.
That's exactly what they do. And I mean, you read it, you read his commentary, or you read that comment, and you're going, you're just making up a bunch of words to explain how commentators pervert the Greek text. You're trying to justify it. Mm-hmm. And it's really quite staggering to me. And William, I remember, you mentioned a few moments ago, the fellowship in which we were raised, the Churches of Christ, all millennial world. And one of the fundamental doctrines of that view is, guess what? The law itself was nailed to the cross. That's how that verse is viewed almost without exception. Now, that's changing. As you well know, there are more and more men coming to understand that's not really what Paul said. And by the way, folks, let me recommend that you go to my website, donkpreston.com. There's a wonderful article on there by Dr. Dallas Burdett. Dr. Burdett taught Greek. He taught Hebrew at the university level. Excellent scholar. And he wrote a really, really great article on the linguistics of Colossians chapter 2, 16 and 17, pointing out it's just a linguistic error to say that Paul was talking about the passing of the law, that the law was what was nailed to the cross. So anyway, go there in the search bar, just look up Colossians chapter 2, 14 to 16. So the point of it being, I will never forget when I was confronted, and this is long before I ever knew Dr. Burdett, not only as a brother, but as a good friend. I was studying this, I mean, in the late 70s in Shawnee, Oklahoma, as I was just begun my scatological studies, and I had my Greek text out in front of me, and I'm certainly not a Greek scholar. As I say all the time, I know enough Greek to make me dangerous. And so, but I do know how to use the Greek resources just like you. You're better at it than I am. So I'm looking at it, and it dawned on me, wait a minute. This is present active. And I had been studying the significance of mellow. And I saw that it was mellow in the infinitive. And it was like, wait a minute, Preston, how can you say on the one hand, the law was nailed to the cross, therefore don't let anybody judge you in respect to new moon, feast days, and shadow, and then turn right around and say that the new moons, the feast days, and the Sabbaths were still present, active, indicative shadows of what had not yet been fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was one of those, one of those astounding moments. You feel like you've been hit up against the side of the head with an 8x8, not a 2x4, but an 8x8, and you're just going, I can't believe I missed it so badly. It's laying right there. What happened to all of these men that I considered my theological heroes in the churches of Christ, who either were themselves ignorant of what it said, or they were glossing right over it, which is worse? And I was literally stunned to discover that. One of those revolutionary moments, in our theological journey, as we continue to see, this is not what I was taught, but that is what it says. And then when you go to the commentaries, and like I said, when you read things like Scott McKnight said, oh, we got to reimagine the Greek tenses here. And then you go to other commentaries more in line with our fellowship, and they don't even mention the Greek tenses.
Yeah.
It's like they didn't even exist. It's really stunning. It's really telling, and it's really disturbing, because very good and well, a lot of these men who wrote a lot of these commentaries, they knew the Greek well enough to figure this out. But it's so challenging to their paradigm, to the very foundation of their theology. They just didn't mess with it. So
that's very true.
Okay, William, any other thoughts on that before we move on?
No, I think that's a good point. I'm glad you called my attention to it, so that now I know exactly what the tense is in the in the text. So that's very good.
I'm glad that it refreshed my memory, because I was thinking, like I said, that it was second aorist, and so to refresh it and find out, oh, wait a minute, that's an imperfect active. Hello. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good information. It really, really is. Okay, William, we're going to skip over an awful lot of the description, and I am not the world's greatest to dive into the typology of the temple instruments. I listened to a tape one time that Jack Scott sent me. My goodness gracious, this has been 20 years ago. I do not know what happened to the tape. I wish I still had it. And I don't suppose Jack is watching, but Jack, if you're still watching, or if you are watching, if you've still got a copy of that tape, I want another copy of it. This tape was by a Presbyterian minister on the typology in Leviticus. And I was going down the highway on my way to Abilene Christian University lectureship, William, where we set up a booth.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a cassette tape. That shows you how long ago this was.
Oh, yeah.
And this Presbyterian minister was just marching through one typological temple utensil, the veils, the priesthood, the garments, the sacrifices. I had never in my life heard a more exciting and fulfilling lesson on the typology of the Old Testament. I could not tell you to this day what I did with that tape. You know, I've moved houses 2 or 3 times since then, twice, I guess. Had a garage fire and all this kind of stuff like that. Had to move out of my office. So I don't know what happened to the tape. And by the way, if any of our viewers tonight might be familiar with this Presbyterian minister, don't ask me what his name was, giving this discourse on the typology of the Old Covenant and the Old Covenant tabernacle, the priesthood, the sacrifices, the temple utensils, etc. If you know how to get a hold of it, you let me know. I want another copy of that. It was literally brilliant. No telling how many hundreds, perhaps thousands of hours this guy had invested in that lesson. So I really want another copy of that. So anybody familiar with it? Let me know. If you got a copy of it, make a copy of it. Send it to me CD. I'll pay you for it. Doesn't matter. So anyway, we're not going to delve into, you know, the temple imagery, except to note in verse 2 and 3 that for a tabernacle was prepared. The first part, in which was the lampstand, the table of showbread, is called the sanctuary. Behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle which is called the most holy, or holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that had manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant, and above it were the cherubim, the glory that overshadowing the mercy seat. Of those things we cannot now speak in detail. Well, I can't either, for sure. But William, what did the holy place and the most holy place represent and symbolize?
Well, it represented, as he said in the text, you know, there was the heavenly and then there was the earthly. And so the most holy place was the place where the presence of God was, and that's where the high priest would enter. And the earthly part was where the other priests would minister in the sanctuary. And to me, that represented the separation that existed between man and God that had been caused by sin. And so I'll leave it at that. You know, I don't want to get too far ahead of where you're going.
No, that's just fine. I think we need to be aware of this. We need to be reminded of this. And let me just share this, ladies and gentlemen. Josephus, in his Antiquities, book 3, as well as book 7, points out, and he's sharing with us the way that the Jews believed at the time. And remember, Josephus was of the priestly family. So he's not some Jew out here in the far-flung regions of the Roman Empire speculating on what might possibly have been thought by the Jewish priesthood and the people about the temple. No. He's an insider. And he's sharing in his book what that temple represented with the holy place and most holy place. And he says that the holy place, which was within the first veil, the outer veil, of course, represented the area of mankind, where all of the priests could go. It represented earth and the dwelling place of man. And then there was the veil, woven with all manner and sorts of, it had the glorious colors of creation to represent earth, wind, fire, and water. It had the purple, the silver, the gold, etc., etc. And inside was the most holy place. And he says that was the place reserved for God. That's where God dwelt. And it was unapproachable except by one man, one time a year, who went in there on the behalf of the people. So that, in a nutshell, is what the Jews saw and believed about not only the tabernacle, but the temple. And William, tell us again what that veil represented.
The veil represented the separation between the two, the separation between heaven and earth, the separation between that part that was represented for man versus the part that was represented for God.
All right. So the veil was a separation between God and man, to put it in the simplest of terms.
Yes.
Okay, William, we are involved in a discussion of the Messianic temple. As we have shared so many times on this program, in dispensationalism, there is the belief that soon, very, very soon, of course, we're told, and we've been being told that for, however, how long, but over and over and over, we're told this is the generation that's going to see the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple. By the way, as a very quick digression here, what most dispensationalists don't like to herald, they don't like to broadcast it and advertise it is, but what they're actually looking for right now is what I call the Antichrist temple. Because in the dispensational world, they believe the church is going to be raptured out of here, just like certain people in the preterist movement claim that the church was raptured out of the church in 64, 65, or 66 AD, depending on which day they're writing. But anyway, but the dispensationalists say as soon as the church is removed from the world, God begins dealing with Israel once again. Only the trouble of it is, this is the irony of this. This is supposed to be the time in which God is dealing with man, but this dude that we call the Antichrist, the man of sin, actually jumps up, and he's the one that's dealing with Israel. Isn't that ironic? Isn't there something wrong here?
Most definitely. It's got to be something wrong.
Interesting
concept.
Yeah. So the Antichrist makes a covenant with Israel, and obviously at the present time, he's got to make a covenant with the Muslims as well to allow the temple in Jerusalem to be rebuilt. He's the one that finances it. He's the one that sponsors it. In other words, he's the one that builds it. Now, there are Jews involved. Yeah, I'm not denying that. So, folks, let it soak into you that in the dispensational paradigm, what they are actually looking for is the Antichrist temple that will stand from the time of the rapture until the midpoint of the 7-year tribulation period, as they call it. And then in the midpoint, 3.5 years into that period of time of peace and harmony between the Antichrist and the Jews, he breaks his treaty with Israel and begins to persecute them. Now, we're never told, as far as I'm aware, I don't remember ever reading it. I've never read anybody explain why the Antichrist, would suddenly break his covenant with Israel that had stood for 3.5 years. Don't know why. We're just told that he will. So it is then that he begins to persecute the Jews. But at the height of the Great Tribulation, the Jews cry out to Jesus. He appears the second time, destroys the Antichrist, and then Jesus builds the Messianic temple. But again, let me emphasize this, ladies and gentlemen. When the dispensationalists talk, oh, they're getting ready to build the third temple. Folks, they're talking about the Antichrist temple. Why would anybody be excited about that? Because after all, with the rebuilding of the Antichrist temple, 3.5 years later, 3/5 of the world's population is going to get wiped out, and 2/3 of the Jews are going to get killed. And we're supposed to be excited about this? There's something wrong with a system that is literally drenched in blood in its eschatological expectation. So here's the point that I really want to get to, William. In the dispensational theme of things, they tell us that now, in Christ, we have access to the Father. When we die, we go directly to be with God in heaven. Well, isn't that going to the most holy place?
Yes.
Okay. But in a rebuilt Jerusalem temple, as they envision it, guess what's restored? The veil of the temple. What does that say to you, William?
Well, it says it just reverses everything that gets accomplished at the coming of Christ, at the time of fulfillment, and it places the barrier back between man and God. And that's really not good. It defeats the whole work of Christ.
Yeah, I mean, why? This gets back to the idea, and you and I, we mentioned this briefly in other programs. Why would anybody anticipate with eager expectation the rebuilding of a temple, which in and of itself represented the barrier between Jew and Gentile? Okay. And yet Dwight Pentecost, one of the most famous writers in all of dispensationalism, said, while it's true that right now in the church, there is unity of oneness between Jew and Gentile, there are no distinctions. That is not the way it will be in the millennium. He was openly stating it. And you're going, why would I want this? Why would I want to be literally, as Dwight Pentecost says, in the millennium, the Gentiles are going to be the slaves of the Jews. He openly says that. We're supposed to be eager about this. And so you just go down the line. Why would I be excited? Why would I be thrilled about the potential of establishing a distinctive priesthood that would prevent me from going to the temple and actually offering my own sacrifice of worship and praise to God? Because after all, I'm not a Levite. I would have to go through a Levite again. What is there about having to offer bloody animal sacrifices that should get me really excited about a future messianic temple? I'm not what you call squeamish, but I don't want to do that. So, William, I believe these are very legitimate questions about what's so desirable about a future messianic temple that restores everything that the Jerusalem temple did and practiced that served as barriers between God and man and between Gentiles and Jews. Why would that expectation be in any way exciting? Share with us. Just go.
Well, I can't see how that would be exciting to anyone who understands, what being in God's presence is all about. To have a situation that's going to reverse that, that's going to negate that, and at the same time, make all the scriptures meaningless from that perspective. So it's just a very dismal outlook, and maybe that's why with views that where they hold this view of this coming temple, most of their eschatology is so dismal in its outlook, and it's always doom and gloom. And then at the end of it, you get a situation that you can't live with, and you got to get rid of pretty much as soon as you get it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we've got salvation, we've got access to God, we've got access to the most holy place, we have the genuine forgiveness of our sin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they want to take that away by reestablishing the veil, reestablishing the priesthood, reestablishing the sacrifice of blood of bulls and goats that can never take away sin. So I reiterate,
reestablishing the land, in a sense, it's going to create even more chaos from that perspective if it were to be carried out.
Well, you and I have talked about this, as I mentioned on these other issues. It's difficult for me to imagine the entire Islamic nation saying, you know what, sure, yeah, you guys go ahead and build your temple up there. We'll stand back and watch. Yeah. And here's what's frightening. Some years ago, it's been 10 years ago at least now, I was doing some research on the efforts to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem and the foreign policy implications of that, the world politic implications of such an idea. It shocked me to discover that there are a minimum of 10 violent attempts to invade the Dome of the Rock, to deface it, to destroy it, to blow it up. Efforts being made by ultra-Orthodox Jews. No less than 10 attempts per year on average. Now that's stunning. They interviewed one former general in the Israeli army, and they asked him, why are you doing this? He was right up front about it, and he said, to start World War III so that we can wipe them out and rebuild our temple. Now, folks, this is an ultra-Orthodox Jew, and they go hand in hand with the dispensational world. Both camps want the rebuilding of the Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. They are both willing to have war to bring that about. And it's so frightening when you hear American politicians, including our current new president, saying we got to support Israel at all costs, no matter what. Israel is our friend. Well, I understand on some levels they are, but make no mistake, folks, they would stab us in the back in a heartbeat. May be doing it. So anyway.
You mean would continue to do it?
Yeah. Well, we won't get too deep into that.
Yeah.
but the point of fact is, I understand some of the demographics. I understand some of the logistics. I understand some of the politics involved. But folks, when one president after another stands in front of the American people and guarantees that even if it costs countless thousands of lives of American young men, we're going to stand with Israel, no matter what they do over there, no matter how many Palestinian lives they destroy. And, Jerry Falwell was asked on one occasion, I don't know if you remember this or not, William. A politician, a political correspondent asked Jerry Falwell. He was getting ready to get on his $3.1 million airplane bought for him by the Jewish government, right? And Jerry Falwell was asked on that occasion, Mr. Falwell, how can you justify supporting the Jewish state when they're going in, confiscating the homes of Palestinian Christians, destroying their homes, and making them homeless? Because after all, they are Christians. And Jerry Falwell's response was, they are squatters on Jewish land. The Jews have a perfect right to do whatever they want to.
Wow, now that's interesting compared to the way God says treat a stranger, right? Even if they were to consider him that way.
Yeah. And if they're obeying the law, they are to be treated as native-born sons. I mean, when I heard that and read it, it was one of those, I cannot believe how blinded some people are in their Zionist zeal. And yet what he said that unabashedly. And other Zionist evangelical Christians have iterated the same sentiment. Hey, go over there and kill those Christian Palestinians. It doesn't matter that they are our brothers in Christ. No. They're squatting on Jewish land. The Jews have a perfect right to kill them. Those Christ-hating Jews have a perfect right to kill people who claim to profess love of Christ. Folks, if that doesn't shock you, if that doesn't shake you in to re-examine the entire Zionist agenda and the entire Zionist theology, I don't know what would. I really don't know what would. But 99.9% of Zionists are out there. They never hear this element. Do they, William?
No, they don't, and it's hard to get it across to them. You know what's interesting, and I don't know what you think about a person like Candace Owens, but she's recently said that she was under the impression, like the rest of Christian Zionists, but she's had this
epiphany,
if you please. That's the word I was looking for, and now, man, she is hitting it hard. And she says, "I don't care what they do to me." I've even watched shows where they have, basically fired person after person, for comments that they make, even, in a show. And that's really tough. And so it just goes on. And it's interesting to see now that we are supposed to be getting back toward freedom of speech, just what is going to be allowed. They say, if you want to know who it is that controls you, find the people that you cannot criticize.
That's exactly right.
And so there's a lot of censorship that was going on from that perspective. But even, at the start of the campaign, I looked at, when they had this whole list of about 8 or so candidates, maybe more, I don't know. But one after the other, it was all full support for Israel. And and I'm saying, is there at least one person who thinks, but there's a lot of campaign money that goes into that, and that's how people say things are going. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. It's just interesting that those kind of things happen, and it's all because people don't understand the things that we're saying here about the end of the old covenant, the end of national Israel, and they're still hoping and wanting to build temples, wanting to bring about this salvation of Israel that they have misaligned in terms of the time of the scripture.
Yeah, and to pick up on that as a corollary thought about how people get so excited about a coming messianic temple. We've discussed this earlier, but it's worth bringing back up again because I still confront people and people confront me. I had somebody, it was like 2 weeks ago, somebody brought this up in a Facebook conversation with me. They private messaged me and, you're just all wet because here's what's happening. You're just blind. Don't you realize they've got 5 red heifers? And I'm going, oh no, here we go again. Oh my goodness gracious. Every few years, ladies and gentlemen, if you watch the news, you don't even have to watch it all that often. You'll sooner or later come across it. They announce, okay, they found some red heifers. And that means the end of the age is at hand. Because in order to have the Messianic temple, you've got to have a fully qualified, fully vetted red heifer sacrifice. Now, William, what makes this red heifer special insofar as its color, its age, and its purpose? Well, share that with us.
That comes out of what, Numbers 19? Am I?
Yes, sir. Yes,
right,
sir.
I think it's Numbers 19.
Yes.
And even Hebrews talks about it as well.
Yes.
It was for cleansing. I'm trying to remember some of the details there, but Hebrews 9 talks about the blood of the red heifer, and that it was for cleansing under the old covenant system, and particularly if a person touched a dead body. I think that was going on, so they were not allowed to do that, and if they did, they had to be cleansed through the work of the priest, and with the ashes of the red heifer, etc. So Some of this done, if I don't keep it fresh in my head, I'll tend to forget a little bit. But it's in
I
Numbers chapter 19. I remember that much.
yes,
And
sir. I have the same problem. But here's what I want us to refresh everyone's memory on. With all of the excitement that comes up periodically, and here's what's interesting, folks. You can go to my website, donkpreston.com, and you can just look up ashes of a red heifer. And what you'll find is some articles that I wrote at one point of time. And about 3 or 4 or 5 years later, I wrote an entire different set of articles because of a new set of red heifers that had been found. And then there's an entirely new set of articles, actually a rerun of some of the previous ones, about a brand new set of red heifers that had been found. I mean, what's the point of that? The point of fact is that every few years, the claim is made the Messianic temple is about to be rebuilt because we now have red heifers. Well, William, a red heifer could not have any blemish, no red hair, white hair, no black hair, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. I mean, this heifer had to be absolutely, totally correct. Now, here's what's interesting. Back early last year, they found 5 red heifers down in Texas.
Mm.
This farmer, rancher, had specially bred them just for the building of the temple. So he flies them to Jerusalem. Well, months and months. And I mean, they had this humongous ceremony. They had this humongous deal made out of these 5 red heifers, right? And I'm sitting back going, this is not going to turn out well. this will not turn out well. Okay. As of several months later, 3 of them had already been completely disqualified because they grew some white hair. Okay. So they can't be used. The other 2 were starting to get too old because this red heifer can't be over a year old. If it's over a year old, it's disqualified. So I believe where we're at right now, I'd have to go back and try to check the ages, but I believe that where we're at right now, chronologically, I believe the other 2 red heifers have been completely disqualified. So that means they're going to have to go look for some more red heifers.
Right.
But here to me, ladies and gentlemen, is the real issue. And a couple of weeks ago, when this individual accosted me and talking about the red heifer and all of this kind of stuff, I said, well, let me ask you this question. Is the law of Moses still in effect? And they were like, of course not. They took the old traditional view. The law of Moses was nailed to the cross. I said, oh, I see. I said, can you share with me where the law of the red heifer comes from? Well, there's Numbers chapter 19. I said, yes. I said, well, let me ask you another question. Is Numbers chapter 19 part of the law of Moses? Well, yeah, but what's your point? What's my point? Okay, you're saying that we've got to have the ashes of a red heifer to fulfill Numbers chapter 19. But Numbers chapter 19 is the law of Moses. And you say the law of Moses is no longer in effect. So tell me how good the ashes of a red heifer in fulfillment of the law of Moses would be in our day and time.
Would you get crickets?
I got a whole lot of crickets. haven't heard from them since. Folks, you've really, really got to catch the power of this. With every single conversation, with every article that is written, with every YouTube video that is produced to get 3 million views, you need to remember they are promulgating of absolute theological necessity, the restoration or the continuance, either one, of the validity of the law of Moses. And that means every jot and every tittle of it. That means every single bloody sacrifice. That means physical circumcision. That means 3 annual trips to Jerusalem for the feast days, for a temple that doesn't exist, etc. Or if it does exist, 3 journeys a year there. And by the way, in the dispensational paradigm, if you don't travel to Jerusalem and to worship there and to observe the Feast of Tabernacles, you're hit with a curse from God. The skin melts off your face. And on it goes. And back to what you were saying a while ago, William, people simply have not thought through, or they've never studied, really, honestly. They listen to these TV evangelists who sound so authoritative, and the Lord spoke to me and gave me this truth. Well, how are you going to argue with the Lord, right? And that's where it comes down to. They do not feel that they can argue with these TV evangelists who swear up and down the Lord talks to them, tells them about the upcoming temple, the ashes of a red heifer, and the restored priesthood, cultus, etc., etc. When basically all they have to do is spend a little bit of time studying and thinking, and they would categorically reject it. And William, this to me is one of the reasons why I find covenant eschatology so thrilling, so gratifying, and so liberating. Don't you feel the same? I know you do.
Oh, obviously, yes. I mean that is. I thought you were going to keep elaborating on what you thought that was.
Come
on. But absolutely, that is. First of all, even when you think of it from the original fulfillment with the bondage of the law, you just think of all those passages where, for example, Jesus talked about, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and the yoke of bondage that's being taken off them. Peter talked about it in Acts chapter 15. Why put a yoke on the neck of the disciples, which we neither our fathers were able to bear. And then Paul talked about it, about this bondage. And so the freedom that they have in Christ from being free from the bondage, the obligations of the law, all of the things that you enumerated, and then coming into that liberty and into that freedom of Christ. And then here you have now, centuries later, people want to carry us back under that bondage to the extent, of having to find a red heifer. I think the best place to put that red heifer is on the dinner table, really.
There you go. Absolutely. I agree 100%.
But anyway, that's the idea. And it's a very liberating thing to see that, you don't have to deal with that situation. And, just imagine what, those disciples felt then, and the freedom that people have in Christ today from that liberation. And then with people trying to push you back into that, all of the tension that it's causing, not only individually and with churches, but as you also said, politically, the amount of just turmoil and frustration, the wars, because a lot of these things, look, you go into that and you study it and you'll see where they had marked out, these are the countries that we're taking out. And they were taking them out for Israel's sake. And even Netanyahu gets on, recordings and says this and tells the U.S. this. And so there they go, taking out one country after another. So it causes so much devastation. It causes so much death and destruction that it's just a sad thing. And so it's so very important to make sure that people understand that freedom that we have in Christ.
Yeah, and to pick up on that, I think it was Peter, Acts chapter 15, if I'm not mistaken, as they discussed whether or not the Gentiles were to keep the law of Moses in order to be saved. And Peter said, or James said, that it was the determination of the Jewish Jerusalem Council that they put on the Gentiles no yoke that neither we or our fathers were able to bear. That's how the Jews viewed it, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if these if these Jewish leaders of the Gnostic church could look at the law, and they love the law, make no mistake about it, they love Torah, and yet realizing that Christ had established a Torah-free gospel, i.e., good news, they were saying, "Look, we're not gonna burden the Gentiles with this yoke. We haven't been able to bear it. We can't keep it perfectly, and our fathers couldn't keep it perfectly." That gives you some insight, and it raises the question once again. Okay, if they considered Torah a burden, these Christians considered Torah a burden, why would anyone want to re-burden either Jews or Gentile Christians with that burden? It just makes no sense. A messianic temple would be a Torah-free temple. And with that, we are out of time. William, thanks for joining me. And as always, here on Two Guys in a Bible. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say good night. God bless.
Good night.
All right, man.
Okay.
Good show. Appreciate it.
All righty.